our next event in August. And do keep a lookout to your newsletter that's coming from NJAX, which is hosting this program, and really driven by the Team Science core of this consortium. So today, it's an honor to have the team from Genmab. This is an international leader in the development of antibody therapeutics. And so this will be our experience learning from the biotech industry about teamwork and what we can learn and take away from how these folks who've joined us today have been developing the next generation of medicines. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kate Sasser, who will begin with a video giving a sense of the Genmab mission as a whole.
Hi, everybody. First of all, thanks for having us today. We're really excited to be here and talk to you on behalf of Genmab and talk to you more about a little bit about what we do, but mostly about how we work in teams. So we will do introductions really quickly, but first we're going to hopefully share a video and I will share my screen and hopefully we can get it to play. Give us 1 second. And this video just talks a little bit more about what we do at Genmab.
What if the world saw cancer differently? What if it wasn't a disease to be afraid of, but a condition people could live with and even overcome?
Understanding and treating cancer better has been our passion for more than 20 years.
And today, we're a leader in harnessing the incredible power of human antibodies.
Ons hart met uw teamposten will keep inventing next-generation antibody technology platforms.
Creating knock-your-socks-off antibodies with a goal to fundamentally transform the treatment of cancer.
We are pioneers, courageous and bold.
The Biotech innovation powerhouse.
自然にヒントを得る。
Rooted in science.
And fueled by data.
ワンチームで働くことによって素晴らしいアイデアが出せることを信じています。
Zo vinden wij oplossingen voor vraagstukken that have never been solved before.
We won't just follow the transformation of cancer treatment. We are going to lead it.
We are Genmab. אנחנו Genmab. We are Genmab.
Wij zijn Genmab.
Genmab.
Genmab. Genmab.
हम हैं Genmab.
Somos Genmab.
我们是 Genmab.
We are Genmab.
What if
Okay,
the world saw cancer differently?
1
What if
second.
it wasn't?
Okay. So hopefully that gave you a little flavor about Genmab and about how we work. And hopefully you also saw that, yes, we're a biotech company. We're very focused on getting antibodies and antibody therapeutics as medicines to patients. That's our key mission. But hopefully you also felt from the video that a huge part of how we do that, especially as an international company, is as a team. So we talk a lot about being a team and what that means for us. And it ultimately is what leads to our success. We couldn't do it without strong teamwork. So we have a great team here today. If you go to the next slide, we'll just really briefly allow each of them to introduce themselves. So I'll start and we'll go across. So I'm Kate Sasser, and I lead the Translational Research and Precision Medicine group at Genmab. We are, as a group and as a team, really focused on understanding our antibodies that we develop and making sure that they get to the right patient at the right time and at the right dose. And each of those things takes a lot of additional teamwork. So I'll hand it over to Erin.
Erin Hennet. Operations team really supports Kate's organization to operationalize their biomarker strategies, and then the trial manager is the one actually runs clinical trials with our CROs.
Thanks, Erin. And
Hi there.
Anna.
Hi there, I'm Susanna Couto. I head the pathology team at Genmab, and our team is international. Half of us are sitting in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and half of us are in Princeton, New Jersey. So very happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Mark.
I'm Mark Foresta. I lead the translational medicine labs here in the US, and they're about maybe 2.5 years old. And in brief, we basically have developed proven and emerging technologies in the genomics and biomarker space to offer insights clinically and into our early pipeline as well.
And last but not least, Hisham.
Hi, and this is Hisham Hamade. I lead the data science team within Genmab, and we partner and are fully embedded within the organization from very early discovery to the opportunity to talk about our therapies to HCPs, the healthcare professionals, and patients. And we love everything about data and how we continue to innovate in applying algorithms and designing new insights out of that data. Happy to be here.
Great. So I think what we hope to do today is spend the bulk of the time actually with this group that we've assembled, just having a more informal discussion. We've got some questions already from the Rutgers team about how we address certain issues that maybe you see popping up in academic labs and teams, and how we address those from an industry perspective. So we'll spend the bulk of our time there, and we also welcome those of you who are chiming in and listening in today to add your questions to the chat or speak up. We're happy to make it also a little more informal as we go along. But maybe first, just to set the stage and set the scene, we have one slide about the drug development process, because of course, this is something that we do every day and we live and breathe it every day, but for many of you, it may be new. So this is just to set the stage for how our teams are aligned around our common mission, which is starting on the left-hand side, finding and discovering amazing antibodies in a really basic research type of setting, which in some cases may be even collaborating with academic groups or academic scientists. And then moving all the way along the spectrum of doing later stage preclinical work, preclinical development, and then eventually getting into human clinical trials. And many of you are familiar, of course, with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, later stage development. And if we're successful with all of that, and we all know that unfortunately the success rate is actually pretty low to make it all the way through those hurdles, but if we are successful, then we eventually can take a new drug product to the regulatory authorities, and hopefully after that bring it to the market, to patients in the real world. And even once a drug is on the market, we have a kind of post-marketing period where we're also doing additional research and really trying to understand how a drug product is being used out in the real world. So this is kind of a high-level overview of the mission that all of our teams are aligned around. If you go to the next slide, and this will be the last slide, teamwork is absolutely, we live and breathe it every day, and we couldn't do our job if we weren't working in teams. And so I just have two brief illustrations here. One is what you're looking at now, which is a kind of framework for how we think about each drug product that we develop. So in our case, because we're focused on antibodies, as soon as we have identified a potential antibody in the discovery phase that we want to bring forward, we actually form a drug product team. And that team, as you can see, is made up from all different members from many different functional groups across the whole company. And so we have functions like biostatistics, medical, safety, also translational, data science, even legal and finance and project management. So it's a really diverse team with many different expertise areas. And each of those team members then is responsible for driving the drug product forward, but also taking those learnings back to their functional area and making sure that each of their functional teams, for example, a translational group or a medical group, is also aware of what's happening within that drug product team. So we like to use the word, or we hear the word a lot, matrices. This is a very matrixed and interconnected organization. You can think of it also as a spider web. Lots of teams working in many different places. And one other example, just to kind of back out a little bit more, outside of our drug product specific teams, we also have functional teams, just in the way that the company is organized. This is not all of them. It's just a few examples, including some of the teams that are represented here today. So you heard pathology, precision medicine operations, data science. All of those different teams are also functional teams or departments, and they have a whole group of people that are organized around how to deliver the outcomes and objectives just for that team. And if you look across the whole company, we of course have also broad teams like HR or finance or legal that really work with each of our groups to help us, again, get our mission accomplished, which is to get drugs to patients. So teamwork is a huge part of our business, and we're happy to talk a lot more about how we address many of the issues that come up when you're working with teams, because of course that means you're working with human beings, and that can make life difficult sometimes. So we'll kick it off. We have a few questions that have already been provided, and we'll start with those. And then, like I said, feel free to ask additional ones as we move along. So I'm going to start with maybe Hisham. And this question was really interesting. It was around, the fact that in academia, many times the rewards are around individual contributions. So you get rewarded, promoted, and gain success through grants, publications, a lot of individual focus, versus in industry where we have to have a more team-based approach. So how do you on the data science side and within your team think about working for the good of the team? How do you incentivize people to contribute to the broader mission that we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. And you said it very well. We're in the industry that makes life-altering therapies. It's an incredibly complex set of products. And some may describe it as a miracle to have a therapy reach patients. A lot of that circle that Kate just described, someone's going to know the biology really well. Someone's going to know the chemistry. Someone's going to address what the efficacy and the safety issues associated with these therapies are. Can this be manufactured at scale? How do we design studies? And how do we, once we do all of this, how do we make the world aware of it, that we have something unique? And I hope that it becomes clear that it's impossible for one person to master what it takes to pull off every aspect of bringing a therapy to people who suffer from illnesses. And the diversity of expertise is really what is needed, necessitates that we have a team. It's just not an option to do it any other way. Without teamwork, we have close to a zero chance of fulfilling our mission and live up to our full potential. So what motivates us is to be in the industry that we're in and to have the opportunity to serve the patient that need us. And this is what creates kind of extreme dependency on each other. We know that one person can't do it all. And so we have extreme dependency, we have extreme trust in each other, and we have extreme respect for each other. And with the team's success come the individual success. This is automatic, and people get to brag about their piece of the puzzle. I discovered that target. I discovered the biomarker that led to the patients that I'm reaching. And maybe I helped launch, or I led the launch of a therapy in a given region. And so hopefully that'll shed some light on the uniqueness of our industry and what motivates us. It goes back to how can we do our best to fulfill the hopes of the patients and what they've put in us.
And maybe, thanks, Hisham, that was a great answer. And sometimes, I guess, because we have such a unique mission and it's a really inspiring mission, that helps us as leaders of these teams. But Susanna, you had pathology, which is an international team. You have scientists in all areas. How do you, and sometimes very technically oriented scientist. So how do you approach this as a leader of that group? How do you get people to think about the team and not necessarily themselves?
Yeah, no, this is a really great question. And I think one thing that Hisham mentioned in what he said, which, you know, I echo all that he said and resonate, is really like, because it goes down to motivation. And Hisham said that specific word. I think motivation is key for anything we do, right? Like we all, regardless of whether we're in pathology or data science or in industry and academia, we all kind of want to know why we're doing what we're doing, and where we're going with this, right? So regardless of where you are, and that is the purpose that we have. You know, Hisham brought up this, you know, we have this purpose of, we want to, at the end of the day, we really want to impact patients. So that is our purpose, right? That's our why. That's why we do what we do, whether you're in finance or whether you're in pathology, right? But I think like sometimes as leaders, we have a clear idea of the purpose and where we're going, which basically defines the goals, right? But I think we really have to make sure that we bring back to the team, you know, constant reminders of this purpose, constant reminders of where we're going. And I think really as a key, I think a key to get anybody to work as a team is to really get aligned around these purposes and these goals as a team. When everybody shares the same purpose and the same goal, then they're working together. But I think for that to happen in a very practical perspective, from a very practical point of view, you need to have a couple of other things. One is, I think you have to be proud and you have to believe in the place that you work in, right? I have to believe in Genmab. You have to believe in Rutgers, right? We have to believe in the institution that we work in. So we have to create the culture that engages people. So that's one thing that I think is very important. And the other one is very microscopic. And as a pathologist, I'm just gonna really say the word. The other one is not just the big picture purpose versus I believe in the place that I work, but the microscopic piece of motivation that's intrinsic to each person of the team, because they're very diverse, right? So if somebody is very detail oriented, I try to leverage that strength into our team. I say, hey, when you do A, B, C, and D, it really helps to advance our goal towards this drug. You know, this is one step closer to the patient. If another person in the team is really big picture, innovation oriented, I try to bring that up. I say, hey, this stuff that you did was really creative, and that really helps us. So I kind of try to put together those two sides into this.
Anybody else want to chime in on this one, or maybe we'll move to the next one? Yeah. Okay, thanks both of you. That was great. The next question is, you know, how do we balance, or how do we as leaders of teams balance talent and toxicity? And I think that's a really interesting idea. You know, we all have seen those teammates or colleagues that we have who come onto a team. Maybe we hire them new into the company and they're amazing scientists, amazing researchers, but they're terrible teammates. So how do you, Mark, we'll start with you. How do you deal with balancing those two things?
Yeah, that's a really good question, an important one, in particular in the lab, because the dynamics, I mean, sometimes you're on top of each other, whether it's the bench or data sharing. You know, I think I've always felt that regardless of the individual's value, you cannot dismiss concerns and complaints about toxic and disruptive behavior. Because, you know, as a leader, if you rationalize one employee's behavior, you're creating a culture of accountability with two sets of rules, which undermines leadership. So I always try my best to be as consistent as possible with one set of rules and no favorites, says the dad of 3 kids. They still, you know, but honestly, in a smaller setting and like in a smaller company and in an academic lab, it can wreak havoc on morale and productivity. So I usually have like 2 go-tos. First is I create an opportunity to observe this person individually in action. And when the circumstance presents itself, I offer timely and quick feedback, and then work with the person to sort of define real-time behavior improvements, right? And it's always important also to provide positive feedback and embrace the concept of feed forward. The other thing is oftentimes, you know, the most, I would say, challenging team members have just wanted their voice to be heard. So I always give them a larger forum in which they can sort of voice their thoughts. and sort of if that's what they're seeking. Historically, my most challenging lab scientists or members have been the most creative and had the most out of the box ideas, but we're lacking their capacity to communicate effectively. And the last, of course, some people, however, still need more guidance and motivation to change their tune. And for these, I'm very clear about expectations and clearly state what's going to happen if they're not met. I found that attitudes do improve when a promotion, a raise, or continued employment can be on the line.
Yeah, I think those are all really good suggestions. Maybe Erin, because I know you've for sure dealt with this in different scenarios. How do we strike the balance?
Yeah, this is definitely the hardest part I found of being a people manager over the many years I've been doing this. And I think it's really our obligation as team leaders to not be afraid to have those hard conversations and really just kind of have an honest and open dialogue with those employees that are, proving to be challenging. Oftentimes I've noticed that they may not be self-aware that they are at times creating such churn. So having those, frank discussions and, explaining to them that their input and they're part of our team, but that we are one team and nobody is going to succeed or fail based on one person alone. It really takes the combined effort of everybody working together towards that same goal. So once they kind of understand that, and sometimes it seems silly and it seems very simple, but it's definitely something that they need to be aware of. And then moving forward, I found if we can bring them into the limelight and by giving them a more high priority program or a certain initiative or something that, gives them visibility to the rest of the company or senior management, it definitely helps to kind of bolster their confidence in themselves, but then to also share their learnings with their teams. But then, as Mark mentioned, we are always graded at the year end on our goals and competencies, and I tend to hold competencies in very high regard. And if all else fails, then they'll obviously get a lower score at the end of the year, which impacts their compensation, which nobody ever wants to have happen. So we usually don't get to that point. I haven't seen it happen too often, but really encouraging them to be a team player and that we can't do this without them is really what I've found to work the best.
I think that's a great, maybe in industry, we have I don't know if it's luxury. We usually hate the performance management process. I have to say, none of us like it. But one thing it does offer us is the ability to make these things really explicit and tie it to rewards and benefits and all those things. So that's maybe a big motivator. We used the word motivation earlier. Erin, I'm going to stick with you and I'll just keep going through questions. I see a few coming in, so we'll kind of work those in as well. We have a lot, certainly in industry, we have people who come and go, maybe even more so than academia, I'm not sure, but we do have people who come into a team and our teams change. We have a lot of dynamic and movement across teams. So how do you, as a manager of teams, how do you deal with people coming and going, sometimes for good reasons, maybe they move on to a new project, or what things do you use to keep consistency between the teams and to keep teams productive?
That's a great question. And it's also, just the critical foundation of our success here at Genmab. But I like to hold team meetings and regular one-to-ones with everybody that reports to me. In an individual setting as well as a group staff meeting to kind of reassess where everybody is. What projects are people working on? What areas are they running into frustrations that could cause them to potentially want to leave Genmab or to go over to a different department, and to give them the ability to grow within our team. Similarly, if there's areas that they are experiencing frustrations with that are with another function in the company, to work together to find a path forward so that they stay motivated and happy and want to be part of our team. Because being a smaller biotech company, we don't really have the liberty of, just moving on to the next person. There's a lot of training and specialized training that goes into the roles that are here. And I think it really is to our benefit and to our employees' benefits to do that hard work and keep them happy. However, that said, we have to do what's the best thing for the employees and our company at the same time. I recently had an individual that we needed to move on to a priority program because it needed the best that we had. And her current team her previous team was really unhappy that she was leaving. But we set up a pretty detailed transition plan and, gave the team full confidence and plenty of time to realize that her replacement was perfectly competent, was equally as great, and that there was a very smooth and gradual transition. So that way everybody was supported, everybody felt that their needs were being met, and we were able to, move forward together.
That's good. I'm going to segue a little bit and kind of weave in, because you mentioned something, Erin, about sometimes people are leaving teams not just for bad reasons, but also for good ones, that their career is growing or they're expanding, and we move them to kind of higher priority projects. And Nancy, I think you asked a question in the chat about how do we have different roles in our team? Some are more public or more visible. I'm going to ask maybe Hisham to chime in here. How do we think about different roles, sometimes really visible ones, or the not so visible that are still important, and how do you acknowledge those across your team, Hisham?
Yeah, very good segue. We are almost agnostic to whether someone is front office or back office. How we think of our team, and I'll go into some of the details, and I'll probably touch on kind of how to mitigate the risk of someone leaving for good or bad reasons. But wherever, agnostic to where someone sits within the team, we need to have this sense of belonging to the team, that everyone matters. It's like a chain, and if you have a broken link, none of it would work. And so ensuring that everyone feels a sense of belonging to the team and the great output that is associated with it is great. Recognition is sometimes even more important. And you'll see us actually recognizing some of the non-sexy parts of the job and the roles, not because we wanted to highlight everything, but to ensure and to raise awareness of how important it is for someone to participate and to really put a lot of importance on their output. Things like empowerment are also key, but we always also try, at least at Genmab, to try to make it fun and interesting. And so as part of someone's job, there's always a side project that, you're looking at moonshots. We know that we can't do those in the near term, but it's good to dream and push the envelope. And these are kind of the high risk, high reward. And it doesn't matter if someone's kind of front office or back office. And so we really try to, irrespective of what podium time someone has, to really ascribe a lot of importance and visibility to those people. And you can, one could use different forums, whether it be internal or external. And you can still do all of this, and people still manage to graduate from their roles, whether it's other companies or other opportunities. And you really love for everyone to graduate and reach their full potential. You just hate for all of people to graduate at the same time, which would create a problem for the team. But in terms of mitigation of what we can do, especially for a data science function, to build in some degree of redundancy and awareness of people's work. So when people do leave, there is someone who's ready, almost like a succession plan type of deal. The other important thing is, how do we use data and capture mechanisms for knowledge and insights, so that when someone does leave, you can serve the institutional memory of Genmab. There's continuity there. This is true for their insights. This is true for the code that they've written. And so we go to extra lengths to make sure that we can serve those, because that's what actually makes the company. It's really the institutional memory. And then really just keeping the team motivated, excited about the mission. Replace ASAP so that others are not taxed unduly when someone goes off. And this could be transitory, when someone goes off for health reasons, paternity or maternity leaves. These happen, they're reality. And so you're trying to really lessen the burden on others within the team. And we're playing a multi-cycle game, so people don't feel a sense of inequity when someone leaves and they have to pull off everything that still has to happen. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm gonna jump a little bit to a question that also has come in on the side, and then we'll come back to the other questions. So someone asked, how do we balance between the very scientific nature of our teams and the non-scientific nature, and what benefit do we get out of merging those two things together? Or do we feel that it's better to be more focused solely on a specific area of expertise, like the scientific angle? And so maybe I'll tackle this one, and then I offer it up to the rest of the team so you guys can be thinking about and chiming in here as well. I mean, this is actually very timely for Genmab, and I'll just give a little example for us as a company, because we are Biotech, we're a very small company, but we are really evolving. So we were, for almost 15 of our 20 years, we were solely focused on very early discovery work. And we were a very European focused company. And so almost all of our teams were located in Utrecht in the Netherlands and in Copenhagen. And the group would make amazing antibodies and then out-license them to larger companies to develop them. And so that team meant that we were almost purely focused on very deep scientific expertise and technical knowledge. And now we have evolved to really start to think about taking that scientific knowledge, those antibodies, and bringing them all the way through to commercialization, which requires a lot of the non-scientific expertise areas that we mentioned earlier: legal, finance, or even commercialization, marketing, patient access, working with insurance companies, payers, and providers. And so we as a company have had to really change how we work between those two scientific and non-scientific arms of the company. And I'm sure the rest of the team can speak to that process. In the end, I do think outside of the ultimate goal of getting a drug to patients, which takes both scientists and non-scientists, so it makes we come back to our mission. Even if we stay focused on the scientific area of just discovering great antibodies, I think we frequently find that innovation can come sometimes from looking at problems in a totally new way. And that means that incorporating non-scientists into a lot of our discussions or into our teams sometimes really makes us more effective, more innovative, and makes us look at problems totally differently. So we really like and embrace kind of bringing in lots of different people with different perspectives. But I offer it up to the rest of the guys if you want to chime in on this. Anybody? Okay, we'll keep moving on because we're getting a lot of other questions, so I'll try to be faster. There's another question around conflict resolution. So we talked a little bit about toxicity and how to deal with that, but also just part of being on a team is having conflict. Sometimes conflict can be a good thing and get us to a better solution, but it can be uncomfortable to go through. So what things, and I'll ask Susanna to start because I have to say she's amazing at doing this, and what things do you think work for conflict resolution and what doesn't work? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, yes, I've been managing teams for a long time, and with teams does come conflict. I think from all the years I've been looking at it and dealing with it, and of course learning with every conflict, I don't really have like a process for dealing with conflict specifically, because each conflict is a different situation, right? So there's no formula, but I do have a couple of ground rules when I deal with conflict. The first one, and I think this one is really important in light of the diversity in the workplace. And I mean, I speak from someone with like 8 nationalities in a team of 14 people, with people coming from different cultures, different baggage, cultural and personal, right? So when you get into a conflict like that, I think one of the main things that I think about is, first, I want to approach the conflict without a predetermined view of what caused it and what role each of these people played in it. I want to see the conflict, and then I want to ask questions, and I want to make no assumptions. So, because if you make an assumption, you're coming from a place that you know, right? You're coming from your own culture, the way you view things, the way you've dealt with conflict before, the problems you had. Is a very personal view. So I try to be really open-minded when I hear about conflict. So I'll ask a lot of questions, and I'll really intently hear it. I want to hear what is the person's perspective, what is every one of the people's perspective into what's happening. And so I approach people individually and ask questions, and I really listen without making assumptions, get some better knowledge of where they're coming from, how this is affecting them, right? Because Erin mentioned this earlier, you know, a lot of the times people are not even aware. A lot of the times the concerns are brought up and they're not even sure exactly what the problem is, right? There's discomfort, there's an issue, but when you kind of sit and you ask, then things come out in words and you really understand the person, but also it becomes more clear to them. So that's one important point. But what I think is important about this one is that you really want to encourage people to be open, to have those open conversations, to have those honest conversations. And to do that, you kind of have to do some homework as a leader. You know, you have to do prophylaxis, so to speak. You know, you can't expect that people can just engage in honest conversations if you're a leader that's not accessible, if you're a leader that's not available. You have to be available. People have to trust you. They have to be able to bring the concerns to you early, when the concerns first come up, before it becomes a big conflict, right? And for that is like daily work, is the, you know, proper care and feeding of the team. You know, you have to have trust, you have to be, and you also cannot dismiss any concerns. You have to really take concerns seriously. They have to be addressed, small concerns. So once you do that, I think you really establish a culture of trust. And I think the second thing is really separating the person from the event, you know, this non-personalizing of conflict. Because once you can separate the event, hey, this happened, or this person made this mistake, or this is what happened, this is how it unfolded, from the actual person, then you have room to operate, you have room to improve, right? Once that person becomes the problem, then you're stuck. So I think those, I mean, in my view, those are the two main things I try to do, you know, be really open-minded, not make any assumptions, and separate the problem from the actual individuals, and then bring everybody in as, with that kind of culture of trust, and talk about it from a perspective of actually knowing what's going on. So that's my point of view.
Radical candor, sounds like.
Yeah, you have to.
Mark, I know, do you want to add anything? Because I know you deal with this as well, with lots of different perspectives on your team.
Yeah, I mean, those are great responses, and our teams work very close together, and it's been super successful. It's probably because we're doing a lot of good things to resolve some of the conflict. But you know, it's always going to be there, right? Conflict is ubiquitous. I think one thing, again, though, just like the toxicity, how you handle it will dictate your credibility as a manager and their trust, right? And you as a leader. So again, it's like that consistency and deliberate process. What doesn't work is very obvious, ignoring it, right? And hoping that it'll just go away. I think the problem there is tension will spread and disrupt productivity. But on the flip side, one of the things I've kind of realized over the years is if you then intervene too early into the conflict, right? In some instances, less is more, right? You could be making a mountain out of a mole. So again, as Susanna said, it's so important to understand the situation. I always have this mantra that sort of says, seek to understand before seeking to be understood, to each of the antagonists, right? It's just what's going on in the other person's mind, and kind of take that into consideration when you're thinking about these things. And the other thing she mentioned, which I always talk about too, is mural dyslexia. Sometimes the writing might be on the wall and you may think you get it, but the other person or persons may not. So I think once you come to that point, you know, I think when I meet with these teams, I do put the onus back on them to come up with solutions because they have to own it. Then I guide them to agree on solution, right? Make sure it's mutually favorable. And last but not least, look, they all want to make their managers happy. So they may give the impression that everything's okay, but it's important to really continue to follow up and make sure that there's nothing still boiling under the surface.
That's a great answer. I also like, you know, sometimes we like to encourage conflict from a healthy perspective, right? Because at least have the perception that people can voice opinions and speak up if they disagree. And we all know as scientists, it can be good to disagree with different perspectives.
Absolutely.
I see another question coming in about, do we have a formal process for figuring out what positions or roles are needed when forming a new team? And so I can start, and maybe I'll ask Erin to think about this one, or anybody else from Genmab who wants to chime in, because this is a good one. We frequently are forming new teams, reorganizing teams that we have into new structures. This, I think, is something that's also very common in industry, is, you know, new leaders, new managers come in, and we're constantly reorganizing and restructuring even teams that we have, on top of forming new ones. And I don't have a concrete formal process. I would say a lot of that is really up to managers and the leaders of the different teams when they're put into that role. Part of the responsibility is figuring out, okay, what do you need to be successful at your mission? And what does a team look like for you? We do have some different governance processes that we go through that would, you know, get approval for hiring those people, creating really clear roles and responsibilities for the different team members, and then sort of bringing them in and formalizing the team. But this is, I would say, something that's constantly happening. Even with the teams that we have, we're constantly reevaluating. Is it still the right formulation? Do we need new members? Are the members that are there? We talked about when people are ready for new career steps, how they may transition or leave teams and join new ones. So I would say we're constantly in flexibility with how we're thinking about our teams. I don't know, Erin, do you want to, or anybody else want to add something?
No, just to add, I think a lot of the discussions that we have and the various teams that we're in, whether that's the leadership team or different, you know, compound teams, kind of as we move towards what the company's vision is, things evolve, landscapes evolve, projects, and some new ones begin. So it's really just a constant assessment of where we are, what else do we need to get to the next step? Does that involve headcount? Does it involve a new function? And then, you know, to obviously go through the approval processes within our internal governance to make that happen. But it's really a lot of ongoing team discussions to get to that point.
The only thing I'll add, Kate, which is something that we tend to deal with quite a bit, is, you know, of course, what Erin mentioned, following the need and the continuously evolving need, but we also have to strike a balance also with what talent do we need to internalize within the company, and what talent do we much rather kind of lease, or partners that we align with outside the company to deliver those services or things that we need to fulfill the mission. And so we tend to reserve kind of the art and a lot of the nascent scientific concepts and processes for internal think tanking, and we relegate some of the more tried and true, maybe it's more of a commodity service or activity, to people who can hire outside as contractors to do this for us. And so the team becomes not just the Genmab team, but the global team. Who are we bringing together to fulfill our mission? And it could be a blend of internal, outside people. And that's a whole different story, how to manage that type of team, because you open yourselves up to a lot more challenges, but that's also something that we consider as we assemble our teams.
That's great. Thanks, Hisham. I'm going to try to combine, I'm just looking at the time, I realize we don't have too much longer left. So I'm going to try to combine a couple questions. We have a question from a fourth-year PhD student about how we think about, you know, new people coming into the company, how we measure sort of industry soft skills, which we've been talking about, teamwork as a good one, communication, all of those things, versus expertise that may be more scientific or on the academic side. And there's another question very similar, so I think we can put these together. You know, how do scientists who've been in academia for a long time, 10 plus years, how are they received and viewed when they come for a job interview at a place like Genmab? So this is a good one. And maybe I'll ask Susanna or Mark. I know you guys are in the process, well, all of you are in the process of hiring different people, but frequently we do hire a lot of academics who are coming directly from academia into positions. So what do you look for when you're hiring candidates? Susanna, do you want to start?
Sure. I think the question of, how do you perceive a scientist that's been in academia for a long, long time? I think for the most part, all of us were that person one day. We were all in academia for a while before we moved to, I don't know if all of us, but the great majority of us, had started our careers in academia and then transitioned. So I think it is, I think we perceive this as as one other route of your career. So, and I think it's not looked upon in any specific manner. We just understand, it's just like looking at any candidate. To me, it's like you understand the strengths of that person coming from that specific background, which is, a lot of the scientific skills, the being involved in a really deep, in-depth investigation and having that technical background. And we also understand that there might be a little work to be done, for instance, on this new mentality. How do you approach this super diverse teams? Because now you're no longer working on a very specific role, on a very specific molecule or a very specific project, which is usually a more academic approach. You're now working with all of these things, like Kate mentioned in the beginning, right? You're sitting in a room now with somebody from clinical, somebody from commercial, there's all of these new sets of skills that will have to be learned. But I think we approach that, at least I approach that with a very open mind. It's like, these are a set of strengths and these are things that we have to add for that person's role. But that, I think, is just like that in any new role, right, that you're stepping in. So I just look at it as separate skills from some people.
And maybe Mark, I know you've hired some folks directly from academia even recently. So how do you...
So with respect to the PhD, the soft skills and expertise, my perspective, is first and foremost your expertise in your PhD. I mean, when you come to the biotech world, you may not be doing the same type of biology, right? So what I look for in the scientist is, scientific rigor, sense of urgency, someone that has really properly followed through their project, but also has the soft skills, can communicate it effectively. I think the biggest challenge sometimes in the biotech environment, and Suzanne kind of hinted upon this, is there's a lot of change, right? Projects change, priorities change, and that affects people differently. I mean, when you're in an academic setting, you can focus on a certain sort of molecular pathway or disease indication and make a phenomenal career out of that. Whereas here, you may have to pivot left if a target dies, right? Or if a project gets reformed. So I always look for someone that can come in. Obviously, scientific strength is really important, rigor is important, but someone that will be okay in that environment and won't find it difficult to pivot if needed to go where sort of the impact to patients would be.
Yeah, Mark, and I would just add that sense of urgency that you mentioned is important, right? Because we're dealing with patients that, are sick. We need to get these things done soon. So I think having the flexibility to pivot, like you mentioned, but also really, we got to have this done soon. We need to do it tomorrow, right? It's not like a leisurely route somewhere. So I think that's an important skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And communication. I would say that's such a big part of being on teams and telling, you have to be able to communicate your science to sometimes really technical fellow scientists all the way to the accountant who has no idea what you're talking about. So
right, which harks back to the earlier question about the scientists, non-scientists. I don't like that word, but you do have to speak to it, right? To communications, to finance. So
absolutely,
that's really important.
Yeah. And I think we have another question that actually is very similar, but maybe we'll take a slightly different angle, which is how do we then recruit? What methods do we actually use to recruit team players? So if teamwork is so important to us, as we've been saying this whole time, what can we actually use to really make sure we identify those people. And maybe I'll ask Erin or Hisham. I know both of you are, I can, while you're thinking about it, I can say we actually use even kind of personality tests sometimes in our hiring processes to actually make sure that outside of our own assessments, which can be very biased, we all know we bring our own bias into the hiring process. We at Genmab actually implement a personality and capabilities test that really takes a look at someone and assigns them a different color coding depending on their personality and what motivates them. And different managers use that differently. I see Hisham smiling. I know not everyone is a huge fan of it, but I do think it can give us sometimes some additional insights, because I think the question was around, do we have tools to actually do this? And so, yes, we do. They're not always the best tools, but we do use some things like that. But maybe Erin, do you want to start?
Sure. And my answer is going to be something along those lines. We have this kind of assessment tool that is probably some sort of hybrid between a Myers-Briggs and the GMATs. It kind of takes all of these questions, in whether they're numeric, logical, and gives you an output onto, what drives individual people, how do they operate in teams, how do they drive results, how do they communicate. And as a result of that assessment, it gives you some clear questions to ask the individual in their next round of interviews. So you can, if there's an area that maybe they scored more lowly on, you could, dive into the details there and kind of ask them for more concrete examples of what they've done when they've encountered this example in their previous career. And you can, then as the hiring manager, make your assessment based on their response there.
And maybe Hisham, I know you're not a huge fan of some of these tests, but what tools and techniques do you use when you're hiring, data scientists who also need to be really good team players?
Yeah, so and for the record, I'm not anti some of those tests, because you have at best a half hour to an hour to evaluate someone who hopefully is going to be part of the team and contributing for years. And so it's really an impossible task. And so some of these tests have, a lot of data behind them to suggest what they can do. And maybe one needs to have a healthy dose of awareness of what their limitations are. And so how, I try to complement some of these is by leading questions. Of course, if you ask, are you a team player? 100% of the time you'll get, yes, of course, best. And so asking someone to define their role, to give examples of how they communicate, how do they, what informs their work? Where do they get the problem statements? And what role do they play within their team in communication, either translating the problem statement into, in our case, an algorithm or a computational work stream? And then where do they stop to relay the insights back to the team in a manner that is actually actionable, that allows decision-making to happen in a differentiated manner? And so usually you get a wide array of question, and this team is probably aware of some of these things, but you're trying to ask kind of roundabout questions just to glean and piece together aspects of the puzzle. There's no substitute to compare notes. Usually people are on a different kind of behavior with a hiring manager versus others, and this is why we encourage a team approach to interviews as you might employ in your academic institutions, but those become very valuable. And a few times I've been very surprised in terms of the conversation and where it went with others versus myself. There's no secret, it's just trying to approach it from multiple different avenues.
I like that. Okay, I think we've addressed most of the questions in the chat. So we have kind of just a few minutes, and maybe one final question, and I'll go around and ask everyone to weigh in, which is, what is the greatest challenge you have as a team leader, as somebody who's leading teams and working amongst teams yourself? So maybe I'll start with Susanna.
Sure. I think for me is to keep the team engaged while we're working towards a goal. And I think that became very obvious to me during the pandemic, where we all separated and unable to meet as much as we would have, and really just to maintain that connection between the people, which goes beyond what you're doing professionally, right? I'm not saying that we all have to become friends, because we're not going to go out every day and become friends outside of work, but I'm saying that really having some sort of personal connection and being engaged with each other, I think that's keeping that in this current environment where we're global companies, people are spread all over the place. We're more remote than ever with the pandemic and how the work environment is changing. I think that's the greatest challenge, is to really not forget the individual within the team. That's how I think about that.
Great answer. How about Mark?
Yeah, so I think the greatest challenge but also it's a reward. And I hate to kind of do that whole classic spin, but it's true that I've experienced the last 7 to 8 years has been the wide range of demographics, from baby boomers, Generation X, millennials to Gen Zs in my groups, right? So what I have found is, I'm sure many of you have, is that each of these demographics defines job satisfaction differently. Work-life balance, compensation, personal development, feedback, workplace flexibility, recognition of impacts. So I do feel like you have to deeply understand each generation's values when it comes to satisfaction of jobs. And I don't want to call out the millennials, but let's be honest, they're the first generation of the labor force to be digital natives, right? So with that, the workplace dynamics have changed. Individual offices gave way to open plans, spaces, and now it's being placed by hot desking and telecommuting. I mean, when I was in school, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm old, but for me to work from home on a Friday, I was like, well, you got a lab in your office, in your garage, so it's a different sort of perspective. But I do think if you get it and you can sort of address it, it adds tremendous value, having all of these perspectives.
Yeah. And maybe Erin?
Yeah, I would say probably hiring and retaining talent. Obviously, we want to hire people that will fit into the team, but we also want to hire people that want to stay at Genmab, maybe not in their exact role for a long time, but at least stay within the company. And I think especially in the Northeast, where there's a lot of pharma and biotech, it's very easy for people to jump from company to company to gain experience and a different and higher title. So it's definitely a challenge to find those people that want to grow the company and stick around for longer than a few years.
Yeah, and Hisham.
Yeah, the biggest challenge here is to keep each and every single member of the team engaged. And engaged is, for one to be engaged, you really have to know them. Be local very, very quickly. I don't care if you put guidances in place, it's really how it affects every member of the team. And so I would say, just to be able, if one engages 100% of the team, they're probably a rock star, because then, even if people want to leave, they'll actually give you a lot of time, and they'll be part of the solution to leave things much better than they were when they started. But that engagement is crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, I will just add that I think the challenge of leading teams is that you're working with human beings, and human beings are extremely complicated, whether they're talented or not talented, if they want to grow their career or stay in the same position for years and years. It's a challenging, complex thing, which we've just spent a lot of time talking about. So I want to thank Rutgers for inviting us, and I know we're at the end. So unless there's any additional questions, we'll thank you for the invitation and thank everybody for attending.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Genmab team. Everyone, smash your like button and subscribe to this channel. That was fantastic, folks. Any final questions for the Genmab team? This has been a wealth of knowledge for me personally. So
yeah.
No, well, again, everyone, happy summer solstice, happy Father's Day, a little belated to those who are out there. And thanks again to all the leaders at Genmab. Good luck on your mission, and we certainly value everything that you do for our patients. We'll keep trying to feed you talent and hopefully feed you new discoveries to continue the work.
Thank you guys. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.